So, all right. So now we're recording. So 3, 2, 1. Hi, I'm Karen with My Kids Gay, and I'm okay. And I've got a great guest today. Cameron in Pennsylvania is going on an adventure. Cameron, would you introduce yourself and then kind of give everybody an idea of what it is you're getting ready to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Cameron Wine. I live in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. My day job is professor for sport management at Commonwealth University on the Bloomsburg campus. And about 3 years ago, I came out, transitioned, I should say, as a trans man while working in college athletics as an assistant athletic director. Well, I first came out when I was an athletic academic advisor, transitioned into being an athletic administrator. And really, when I was transitioning, I remember going on Google and I was trying to find trans athletic administrators, or, trans people working in college athletics. And their results were zero. I couldn't find anybody. Of course, there are people who are trans who work in college athletics, but I couldn't really find any stories, or anything that came up was just about trans athletes, and obviously all the negative things about trans women in athletics. And so I realized that if I was going to transition, I was going to have to create the blueprint for myself. I was going to have to figure out what it meant to be trans and work in college athletics. And as I progressed in my journey, I realized that there are first in every single job. There are people who think they're alone when reality, there's somebody else who shares similar stories. They just haven't found that person yet. And that was the same for me. I went to a support group. I kept going to the support group. Kept saying to my therapist, there's nobody like me at this support group. And then my therapist said, keep going. Like, you don't know who's going to walk in. And a couple weeks later, somebody walked in with, athletic parka on. And I was like at a nearby college. And I said, do you work at Union College in the athletic department? And they said, I don't, but my partner is the associate athletic director and she's a trans woman. And I never had a conversation with that associate athletic director, but knowing that there was somebody 30 minutes down the road, knowing that if something went wrong, like I could reach out to her, made it a little bit easier for me. But that's really where the 50 States of Trans Voices project originated from, is me wanting to be able to connect with people in athletics, but then realizing there are so many fields where people, don't even know that the person, maybe it's a doctor, maybe it's a lawyer, maybe it's a construction worker. People just don't even know that that person is trans. And the idea of this project is to humanize the trans experience. So often trans people are talked about rather than listened to. And the goal of this project is to travel to all 50 states, speak to as many trans people as possible, while also connecting with community partners and organizations and having community conversations. And the end goal is to create a documentary and a book.
That is awesome. So I always share, I met my first trans person about 3 years ago. But what I actually realized was I'd been meeting trans people all along. It was the first person who told me that they were trans. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And people don't realize that they live among us. They're a part of our fabric of our community, and they have been here since the beginning of time. And I think that is very misunderstood. I think it is demonized. And I think that the things that are being said are so wrong, like the bathroom bills. We're going to protect the women. So you, trans male, if you go with the bathroom bill, you'd have to go into the bathroom with me. And I think the average person looking at you would go, I don't want this man in here with my daughter or my wife, and that's what they don't understand. I'm glad that you're taking this initiative to educate and to take this time to put the face on it. And so many trans people, I'm working on my second book, and I've got more people from the trans community coming out going, I want my story told. I want my story with my name told. I don't want to hide. people need to understand me. And everyone that I've talked to, they start talking about, like, I was 4 years old, I knew something wasn't right. I mean, you don't wake up one day and go, I think I'll be a guy,
Mm-hmm.
and so, and then, the rhetoric, I'm not going to tell you something you don't already know. Well, you can go to school as a little girl and come home in the afternoon as a boy, and the parents have no clue what's going on. And I've talked to Dr. Dennis Button. He's a therapist, trans therapist in Owensboro, Kentucky. Dr. Bobby Glass, and another therapist in Louisville, Kentucky. And they're like, that's not the way it happens. And it's a long process. And you can't just wake up. I couldn't walk in and go, hey, I want to do this, because you have to go through counseling and live a certain way for a year before they even start hormones, from my understanding. What was your journey like? At what age did all this fall together for you?
I didn't have the language. So I didn't, I grew up a tomboy. And I thought that was what I was. I was a tomboy. Everybody said it. And I just knew that being a tomboy made me a little bit different than the girls in my class. I was fortunate when I was younger to have two parents that allowed me to do the sports that I wanted to do. So I played football and I wrestled. And then when I started hitting puberty, I wasn't able, my parents didn't allow me to do those sports anymore. And so in my mind, I just was like, oh, I can't do this because I'm a girl. And I didn't really care about the gender of it at all. I just cared that the two sports that I loved were, kind of ripped away from me. And I found, my escape in other sports. I played basketball. I played softball. I fell in love with throwing javelin, because it was that going back to that one-on-one mentality of being a wrestler. But it was my freshman year of college that I actually saw a trans person in the flesh for the first time. And I was at a Catholic university my freshman year. And so a lot of my freshman year didn't make sense to me. Like, I was struggling at that time with, I first came out as, a queer woman, and I was struggling with my sexuality. And then I saw this trans man and I said, maybe that fits me. But still at that point, being trans, I didn't know what it meant to be trans. Like I said, that was the first person I saw. So I kept saying, no, I'm just queer. I just like women. And, I was very fortunate that I came out as queer at the end of my freshman year. And I came out because of my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. I came out because I said, in my small town, I'm not going to date a girl without my family knowing that I'm queer. My dad's a high school football coach, very small town. People talk. I want to tell my own story. And my wife and I ended up getting married in 2016, and my wife's bisexual. And probably, I don't know, 6 months into being married, I just went to her and I said, I think I figured it out. Like, I was in college. At this point, I was the president of the Gender and Sexuality Alliance. I had went to conferences. I've seen more trans people who are my age, which this person my freshman year was a comedian, was not my age. And the more I just realized, like, this is a thing. Like, I said to my wife, we were at that conference in the hotel room, and I said, I've been trying to, like, pinpoint for so long, like, what is, like, wrong with me. And I realized that I'm struggling with my gender identity. And thank God for my wife. My wife was like, okay, like, not that she expected it, but she wasn't really surprised by it. Like I said, I grew up a tomboy. I'd always been more masculine. And she just said, we'll figure this out and what this means. And it took me a lot longer to fully embrace who I was. So that was in 2016. 2018, I finally said, you know what? I'm going to tell my sisters and my mom. And that didn't go, I don't want to say it didn't go as I expected, but I was hoping more from that first conversation. My sisters were great. They're like, okay, let's pick a name. But they're younger. My mom just said, I love you, but we can't talk about this. And that's exactly what we did for 5 years. I kind of just dealt with it with my wife. We have a cat, so she would like call me, my cat's like Papa, use like masculine terms in the house. But I started going by like my initials in college. But in 2023, I was working at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. And that's really when I hit my breaking point. Like, I had been moving so much, starting new jobs, and I worked so much, and I realized I was running from my truth. I realized that I would stick around just long enough, and then people started really get to know me, and I'm like, oh, like, I got to move on to the next thing. And at RPI, there was one moment where I realized like something in my life has to change. And, I got to work at 6 a.m. I was going to be working till 11 p.m. And the first meal I had that day was between 4 and 5. And I picked my wife up from work, grabbed McDonald's, went back to work to teach a class. And then I had to monitor study hall for my athletes. And I ate so fast in the car that literally within seconds, it just came right back out. And I, splashed water on myself, went in to teach a class, and my boss was standing there and she was like, "Are you okay? What happened?" I was like, "Oh, I'm fine. Like, I just threw up a little bit. Like, I'm good to go." And she was like, "You need to go home." And I said, "I can't. I have study hall tonight. Like, I have to be there for my student athletes." And I ended up staying and, teaching the class, going to study hall. But I realized like I was working so much because I was avoiding my brain. I was avoiding my mind. If I was busy, I didn't have to think about the truth. And it was April of 2023 where I finally said, "You know what? I need some help. I'm going to start going to therapy." And the reason it took me so long to get to that point was my freshman year of college, I worked with a therapist on campus, and they focused a lot on my parents divorcing, separating. And I mean, that hit me hard. But the reality was I was queer and I didn't know how to handle that. And they kind of just avoided that topic, brushed it under the rug. I remember one of the counselors saying, like, "You just have to pray." And that was my first relationship with like a therapist and experience with a therapist. And for a long time, I'm like, that's what every therapist is going to be like. But I realized like, I got to try this again. I got to try to find somebody who knows nothing about my life that I can just talk to and be real with. That's not my wife. And I got lucky. I still have the same therapist. Still working with her today. But I remember going into that, and I don't think I told her the first time that we had like our consultation or anything, but it was very early on in therapy that I said, "I'm trans, but I don't think I can be trans and work in college athletics. And so I think I'm going to have to leave athletics, transition, and then maybe when I pass, I can come back and work in college athletics." And, this next thing that my therapist said has stuck with me since that moment. She said, "Why would you have to leave somewhere that you love because you're worried that other people are going to be uncomfortable?" She said, "You can't control how other people are going to react to your existence, your being, you being trans. All you can control is who you are, and you show up as who you are. And if they have a problem with that, that is something that they're going to have to work on." She's like, "Because you're already working on who you are." And so that was in 2023. I remember saying, like, "I'm never going to go on hormones. I don't want to go on hormones. I just want to have top surgery." And she was just like, "Okay." She was like, don't pigeon yourself into a box. Like, don't pigeonhole yourself." She was like, "You might say that now, but 6 months from now, you might think something different, and that's totally okay." And so I remember it was like baby steps, like July of 2023. So I started therapy in April, July 2023. I think it was July 23rd. I started going by Cam. I remember, at this point, I had told more people. It was actually, I think, the Christmas before. I just gave my mom a journal with all the poems, all because I'm a writer, all my writings and everything that I was struggling with. And I just said, it was the last gift I gave to her. And I said, Mom, Kelsey and I are going to leave. We're going to come back in an hour. If you don't want me to come back, just text me. And an hour passed. I hadn't heard from her. Made our way back, and my mom just at the door, gave me a hug, said, I love you. She said, I don't fully understand this, but we'll get through this. And so, like I said, July 2023, started going by cam. Then in February of 2024, I'm a planner, and I knew I wanted to get top surgery. But at this point, at this point is when my therapist was right. I realized, you know what? I think I might want to go on hormones, but I want to know what that process looks like. And so I actually went to a trans medicine doctor in Albany, New York. I was really, fortunate to be in a place where I could see somebody who literally their expertise was trans medicine. And so I went to her and I was like, what is like the timeline? Like hypothetically, if somebody wanted to start hormones. And she said, well, they use the informed consent process. And she was like, you're over 18. She said, I would walk you through a series of questions. I would give you all the side effects. And she said, you could start today if you wanted to. Not start, but you know what I mean? Like get the hormones. And she's like, is that something you want to do? And I didn't realize until that moment that, yeah, that was absolutely what I wanted to do. I just thought it was this very, like, it was going to be a longer process. And I know that if I was under 18, it would have been a very long process. But at this point, I'm a 27, 28-year-old. Like, I was in therapy. I, had been masculine for a long time. I had wore binder since not every day, but I got my first binder, I think, in 2016. I had been going by cam for over 6 months, using masculine terms in my house for way longer than that, probably about 8 years by then. So that's a very long-winded answer, but I think once I realized, like, oh, this is who I am, and I look back and I'm like, this is actually, I think I realized this when I was probably 5 or 6 out on the playing at recess. And I remember my mom when I was like 8 or 9. This is really silly, but I was going to the county fair with my older cousins, and I wanted to wear basketball shorts. My mom wanted me to wear jean shorts. And I was like, no, I want to wear my basketball shorts. And she was like, do you want me to start calling you Al? And I was like, no, because you know what I mean? Like, I didn't know that and looking back, I'm like, even my mom deep down, like, knew something when I was 7 or 8, like, even though that's not like, that was just clothing and that's gender expression. But I do think the people in my life, if they look, especially my sister, she's 6 years younger. I've had multiple people in my life that I've met later in my life who are like, no, Cam fits you. Like, that is you. That's who you are. And that's always like reassuring. Like, especially obviously my family like saw me one way, grew up with me one way, but to have these people who came about in my life later who are just like, no, that's who you are. Like, and they'll see old pictures of me and that they're like, you're beautiful, but that's not you. Like, this is you. And so that's always reassuring.
And I think a lot of people just need to realize who you are and presenting now is who's always been inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I talked to one mom, she's like, I think my son thinks he's gay. And I was like, okay, would you tell him? She goes, I love him. I said, great. So like 2 weeks later, I saw her and I said, how's he doing? She goes, he's dating a girl. And I said, it's a journey. Just give him some grace and give him some time. Because I think the hardest thing is, as a parent, we're afraid for our child. There's a big target on their back. And so that's our first thing, is the fear of our child being ridiculed and teased and bullied. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
into that discussion. From a trans child, I can imagine that fear being ratcheted up even a little bit more because they are so misunderstood
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. You know, across society, we've made it harder and stigmatized it in a way it shouldn't be. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah. So, you know, I always tell the parents, think about when you were 17 and 18 and where you're at now. I mean, you're always evolving and changing, and something you thought was fine until you try it, you
Mm-hmm.
don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I don't know about you, but I don't know how many times I've gone in and go, "Oh, this will be great." And yeah, I'm midway through thinking, "It's the dumbest idea I've ever had," or "It's the greatest thing I've ever
Yeah.
had." So even when it comes to the identity, where I was at 18 and where I'm at now, later in life, much later in life, I'm a completely different person. Um, and I mean, you know, and I can, but I think the number one thing is accepting yourself for who you truly are,
Mm-hmm.
and everything. And if you don't accept yourself for who you truly are, it permeates across your life in all kinds of negative behaviors, you know, drugs and alcohol, risky sexual behavior. And I just had Dr. Dennis on a couple of weeks ago, and he said, if you can't accept yourself and love yourself, you will not allow someone else to do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
No.
that is so true, you know. And I have to give you his contact information because I think that that's somebody you'll want to talk to. I got two people I want you to contact on
Okay.
this. They're both in Kentucky, but you could do a 2-for-1.
And I literally just did a virtual conversation with somebody from Kentucky on Monday. So
Perfect. Perfect.
yeah.
It's great. And yeah, a lot of my trans people are coming in out of Kentucky, which kind of most of that area is very rural and very small town,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not moving. I mean, I was like, wow, you guys aren't going to move. Nope, I'm not moving. People have known me.
Yeah.
One person said, I was always a tomboy. I played football. And then when I figured this out at 19, no one was shocked.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, this is who you are. Um, and so I think that having these conversations are important to change the misinformation that's out there and to destigmatize this part of our society and stuff. So, yeah. So, okay. So you're going to now, are you traveling now or are you
I'm starting my travels on, well, I started last summer actually. I was in Chicago for a youth leadership seminar and I stayed for after the seminar for an extra like week and a half. And I, did some interviews last summer. But at the time I was working in college athletics, which is very, very busy hours. And in the spring, so then I moved a lot of my conversations virtual with the idea that kind of like I wanted to flush some things out, make sure that these are people who actually, I mean, every story is worth telling, but I had one person that I interviewed who was very short and like did not give me anything, like 2-word answers.
yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know, there's not a lot of meat here. So I'm glad that I had that virtual conversation. And if, they're more than welcome if I'm close to where they're at to show up and do an in-person interview, maybe it would go a little bit better and give more information. But anyways, I switched to virtual just to kind of give an idea of a lot of people reach out, say they're interested, their email. And then when I follow up and say, okay, here's my Calendly, like get on my calendar, there's less people that are willing to do that.
Yeah.
So making sure that I have concrete people in every state and figuring out what areas is they're more saturated. Obviously, I can't make it. I would love to make it to every city, but that's something that maybe in retirement when I'm way older, I could do that. But I'm going to be traveling to North Carolina, July 6th through the 11th, or sorry, July 6th through the 15th. I might make a stop in Columbia, South Carolina, just waiting to hear back from some community partners. And then July 20th to the 22nd, I'll be in New York. July 24th to the 28th, I'll be in Maryland and DC. August 6th to the 11th, I'll be in Ohio and in Kentucky. September, right now, I have a trip to Virginia. And that's all that's on the horizon as of today. But I have probably, I don't know, 250 emails sent out to community partners, local universities and colleges. Yeah. So, but July will be the first. I feel like I have a lot of travel set up and ready to go, and community partners, and a lot of folks that I'm really excited to go to Raleigh to talk to a mom and her trans daughter who is 14, to hear from a perspective, a mom of a young trans person, but then also the mom's like, I would love for my daughter to be able to share her perspective of being trans. So yeah, I'm super excited to actually, like, I feel like I've been working on this idea. I've done marketing materials, all of that for probably a year and a half now. And like I said, I did that one trip into Chicago last year, but now I feel like I got the ball is rolling and we're taking off.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And I've got another person in Indiana for you too. So I got some contact as you're talking. I was like, oh, you need to talk to this person. So, how is your employer, with you being out trans and much more vocal? How's your employer doing with all of this?
Yeah, so it's okay. So one of the reasons I transitioned from working in college athletics to being a professor, and right now I'm technically a full-time temporary professor, is in the fall semester, I did my job as an assistant athletic director and would commute an hour and 40 minutes up to Bloomsburg and teach one class Tuesday, Thursday. So I had a full-time job and then also was in the car, almost 8 hours a week to teach a class. And I was in the car more than I was in the classroom. And at the end of the semester, I had talked to it. Okay. So where I teach, it's a 3 universities that kind of integrated, still 3 separate campuses, but we're Commonwealth University. It used to be Lock Haven, Mansfield, and Bloomsburg. And so I graduated from Lock Haven. I graduated from the program that I'm teaching in. So at the chairperson of the program was actually my advisor in undergrad. And so in everybody that I currently work with, who's a full-time faculty member in sport management, was my professor before I transitioned. So they knew me when I was in college. I was outspokenly queer. I was married in college. I was the president of the Gender and Sexuality Alliance. So I've never hid that once I came out, never hid being queer working in athletics. Being trans, I was expecting to have some pushback. I was expecting people to misgender me or call me the wrong name. And not once has that happened by the faculty that I work with in sport management. I have worked at other universities where nobody really checks in. My first 4 weeks at Commonwealth this spring, the chairperson reached out and was like, I don't want to pry, but I just want to check in, make sure you have a support system, make sure you feel connected. I know that it's not easy being a trans person right now in our society, and I want to make sure that you feel like you basically that you're welcomed and you belong here. And that faculty member does not know how much that meant to me, just to know that somebody, wants to check in on me. But also I responded to her and said, this is 100 times better than working in where I was in college athletics. I feel supported by the leadership of my department. I feel supported by the leadership of the College of Business. I already had relationships across campus because I went to grad school on the Bloomsburg campus. And I have now taught 5 classes, and I've only had one student misgender me to my face, or not really to my face, but just was saying, oh, she said da, 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 da. And that was in the fall in an intro to sport management class. And right in that moment, I said, him. And I said, but thank you, da, 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 da. And after that student reached out to me apologizing, saying, she didn't mean to do that. She usually gets pronouns right. And I said, I knew that there was no malicious intent, but I also knew that if I did not correct you in that moment, I was going to okay everybody to start using she, her pronouns. And I've had that happen elsewhere where I don't correct somebody and I'm like, and I want to control this experience of teaching as much as I can. And last night I just posted on LinkedIn about, going to North Carolina and looking for more people to connect with. And the first person who liked the post was the dean of my college. So I've just been, even though I am in rural Pennsylvania, I've been very fortunate and I think it helps that the people who I'm working with, they knew me pre-transition. They know who I am. They know that being trans is not everything that I am. And they know that, I work hard, I care about my students. And at the end of the day, like, that's really what you want from a faculty member, somebody who shows up. And so whether I show up as, cisgender or transgender doesn't really impact my job.
Right. Well, and two, visibility matters. Just like you growing up, you knew you were trying to identify who you were. And until you just, that visibility and that representation, it's not shoving it in people's faces. There's a segment of the community that needs to know this is okay, this is fine because I do identify with this person. I mean, and it's not all black and white. It's not all male, female. I mean, there's just, when you get in, like I was in Bloomington Pride last summer.
Mm-hmm.
So this person starts talking about me. I'm an XXY chromosome. Well, it's been a while since I was in a science class. I was like, oh yeah, and they start telling me all about their XXY and their family at least did not opt for an operation at birth. Mm-hmm. They're like, we're just going to let it go and see what happens. And so, of course, after this person tells me their whole story, I'm looking it up, XXY, like, what does that mean? I'm that person. And so then, XX female, XY male, XXY is one of the 23 variations that we know of the sex hormones. Within 2 weeks, I'm in Bowling Green, Kentucky. So here I'm in Bloomington talking to this woman, XXY. She had been assigned male at birth. The family said, we're going to let her do her thing. And by the time 1920, she's actually saying, this is who I am. Mm-hmm. And I had no clue, again, that I was not talking to a biological female or female. I just want to say female. I don't know. So 2 weeks later, I'm in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and this woman comes up to me and she's talking. She goes, I have XXY chromosome. And I was like, okay. Within 2 weeks in 2 separate states, they're not related to each other. So there's a lot of things that we just don't understand. And it's not this blanket, somebody just wants to wear a dress. It's not, and I think that that's where all of these conversations are so important. I know I keep saying it, but it's just so important to have these conversations. So that, number one, someone who is 15, 17, 18, 22 can't quite put their finger on it, but they hear you talk and then they're able to look. Dr. Bobby Glass is 10 years older than I am, or 5 years older than I am. Sorry, Bobby. And she said, at 19, 20, I didn't know anything. I mean, she was quite a bit older until she figured out who she was because she just did not see it. Nobody talked about it. And I think it's really important to have these conversations and to be supportive. Just because we may not understand, you still support people,
Yeah, I say to my, I spend a lot of time, obviously, with college students. I spend a lot of time with high school students because of a youth leadership seminar that I volunteer with. And I always tell my students that I'm very upfront that I'm trans. And I say, you do not have to understand my whole story. You just have to be able to respect me when we're in these spaces. And I hope and encourage you that you will want to learn more about what it means to be trans so you can be a better person around other people. And this goes way further than me. This is people from different ethnicities, races. Like, I want you to be a better human. And I've had multiple students who, I'm always worried like, oh, they're not gonna like me because I'm the trans professor. And, from fall to spring, I had 2 cisgender, male, heteronormative students in my class in the fall. And then in the spring, they're signed up to take 3 classes with me. And then I see them in the dining hall and they find out I'm teaching this other class. And they're like, can we add that class? And I'm like, well, you really shouldn't. It's for high, it's an upper level class. And I said, but I can't stop you. I'm not an advisor. And within 5 minutes, they're added to that class and they take 4 of their 5 classes with me in the spring. And I realized like, they don't care that I'm trans. They just care the way that I teach them and they can learn in my class. And I always do my end of year evaluations. And one of those students, it said, the question was, what is one thing that you learned in this class this semester? He wrote, how to be a better person. And I joke with people because that's not like my job is to teach you about sport management. I hope that he learned something in that specific class about sport law. But at the end of the day, if I'm teaching you how to be a better person, that is something, and that's worth probably way more than you might have missed something in sport law, but that's okay. Like if you can go out and treat people with respect and give them, show them human dignity, then I'm doing my job, because I know there's a lot of spaces where young people are not learning how to respect one another. Yeah. And these same 2 students, now it was for extra credit, but they could have easily said, I'm going to something else that's extra credit related. I did Trans Day of Visibility talk on campus, and they were the only 2 let's just say cisgender men that came to that talk. And so much that one of the trans students looks at me and goes, Cam, who are those 2 guys back there? And I was like, they're my students. And he goes, they look like they're out of place. And I was like, no, they're cool. They're cool. And he goes, I'm so happy they're here.
Yeah.
And I think like I could go on and on about different at the youth leadership seminar. I spoke last year or 2 years ago, and an ambassador talked to me a lot before, an ambassador in a different group talked to me like in passing. And then he heard me talk about being trans and he just got wide-eyed and looked at his facilitator and was like, I didn't know that Cam was trans. And the facilitator was like, yeah, like, and he said, Cam's nice. And the facilitator was like taken back and was like, well, yeah, why wouldn't he be nice? And the student goes, that's not what my mom and dad taught me. My mom and dad taught me to be scared of trans people, that they're like have an agenda, they're out to like get children and like this whole like, narrative. And the student said to his facilitator, I'm going to go home and I'm going to tell my parents that they got it all wrong. I'm going to tell them that I met Cam and Cam is nice. And he was like just a normal person. And the facilitator was like, well, normal, what does normal actually mean? And the student said, well, I just mean like people need to give trans people a chance, like to actually know them. And I always say, and that I truly believe that if people really knew me, they would love trans people. Like, I think I'm a fun person. I'm very approachable. I get all the time that I have a calming presence. Like, I have a tough, this is embarrassing, but I have a tough time like hurting a spider. Like the other day I saw this spider and I was like, oh, now it's dead. Like, you know what I mean? Like I have no agenda except for to show kindness and respect to other people. Like my job is not to, people will say, well, why do you need to talk about it so much? Because there are little Cams everywhere. And I wish I had a Cam when I was, first when I couldn't do football and wrestling anymore. I wish again when I was a teenager and trying to fit in as the girly girl of a small town and be on prom court and all of those things. And still today, I need a cam. I need somebody that I can look at and be like, you know, who's in their 50s, 60s and realize like I have a whole life ahead of me.
Yeah. And I think teaching compassion and tolerance is way undervalued in our society. And I think that we need that more. So that makes, my father was a professor. He was a career military, and then he retired so he could teach. And so he had this 30 something year career as a college professor, and it ended up being the dean of school of business right before he retired too. So it's a big impact. And I think for you to be out and vocal and to be seen and heard, and like you said, Dr. Dennis talked to me last week. He goes, my life is really boring. People think that I have this really amazing life, and it's really a very boring life. And I'm like, I know, I'm right there with you, because I get that a lot too. They seem to think the LGBTQ plus community is some kind of secret society. It's not. And when that gets louder, people are like, why do they have to broadcast this? Why do they have to advertise it? Why? This is making me uncomfortable, So on one end, they're like, well, you're so secretive. But then on the other hand, they're like, we don't want to hear from you, and it's such an enriched part of our human dynamic that if people would just stop for a second and look at everything and embrace it and quit being afraid. I've never been, like I said, I met my first trans person almost 3 years ago. And, he said, I'm a trans man. And I had no clue that I wasn't speaking to a man.
Mm-hmm.
But it made me, and I remember thinking, and I thanked him because my daughter had said, when someone shares this, they're revealing something about themselves, and they're also putting themselves in harm. So
Mm-hmm.
always be gracious toward them. It may take you by surprise, but be gracious toward them. I said, absolutely. So I was like, well, thank you for sharing that with me. And inside I'm like, oh, holy cow, I've never met a trans person before. This is my first one. Oh my gosh, But then I realized, like, midway through the meeting, I was like, I've always met them.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first person that told me.
Yeah.
They've always been here. So, and like you said, I think it's wonderful what you're doing and that you're so vocal, and this is what it takes. And me as an ally, we're just going to keep doing this, until I hope that my book is titled just like the podcast, My Kid's Gay and I'm Okay. And I hope in my lifetime, somebody looks at my book. It's only 100 pages, super easy read. But I hope somebody looks at it and goes, why did somebody have to write this? This is the dumbest book I've ever seen in my life. And that I have to dismantle my nonprofit because people aren't being disowned by their families anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's my hope within my lifetime.
I mean, that's not like, I do a lot of public speaking on college campuses about being a trans person and like college athletics and just about identity and yeah. And I, to my, I don't want to say advantage, but being trans, I have therapy at 12 o'clock today. And this is where we ended last week was I said, sometimes I wish I wasn't trans, but I think I found my purpose in being trans because I've helped my whole life. I've helped people, but I guess I really didn't realize what my impact was until I fully embraced myself. The amount of people, they don't even have to be trans, but just queer students who like come up to me and they know that I'm a person that they can be themselves around. But if everybody could live freely, I would give up all of that. I would give up the feeling like I impact people. I would give up, my side hustle of being a public speaker. I would probably still travel and talk to trans people, but like the reality is there are still so many people who at the base level are afraid to be themselves, who are worried that they're going to be disowned by their parents. And then on a larger scale, who has a country who's trying to erase them and doesn't want them to exist. And I realized, people ask me, I remember one of the speaking engagements I had, a student asked me, like, aren't you like afraid? Do you have no fear? And I said, absolutely. In the back of my mind, every single day, I'm afraid. Do you think that I'm about to start on this journey and I'm going to North Carolina where the bathroom bills originated from? Do you think I'm not afraid? Yeah, I'm afraid. But the other side outweighs that fear, knowing that the good that is going to happen by me going to these states and sharing these stories. And I could live the rest of my life in fear, but that's what they want me to do. They want to erase me. They want people to believe that I don't exist. They want these stories to not exist. And I, believe that I have a responsibility as somebody who, I don't want to say I've had bad parts of my transition. Like, the reality is like, it took me a very long time to get to where I am today, but I've never been disowned. I have seen my wife not really have a relationship with her family because of her sexuality, but I've always had somebody in my corner. And I'm fortunate that I probably haven't been given jobs now that because I am trans, but I've never struggled to find a job. I've never been, knock on wood, attacked like for being me. And the reality is those things are still happening to a lot of people. And I realize that I have privilege being white. I realize that I have privilege of being college educated and working right now on a doctorate. I realize that I have privilege in that I still have my family, and privilege in that I have my wife, and my wife didn't leave me when I came out as trans. And I want to be able to use any privilege that I have for good to be able to help other people. And my goal is always to lift people up as I go up. And I truly, just the stories that I've heard already, like virtually, and the ones I heard in Chicago, is that the trans community is diverse. We all have different experiences. Some of us struggle more than others, but the reality is we're all in this together. Even as humans, we are all in this together. We might be, fighting different things and fighting for equality in different ways, but at the end of the day, like, we truly just want to be able to live our lives and have the same livelihood as anybody else.
Right. And, just like you said, all of the things you may not have gotten a job because you were trans, but for the most part, it's not been a negative impact. And, you didn't lose your family support or the support of your wife. But unfortunately, a high percentage of the trans community do lose that. Mm-hmm. And I blame our society overall. And when I go out and speak to parents, I always lead with, as a parent of a kid in the alphabet community, we are pressured to disown our children. Mm-hmm. And I have yet to have a parent go, I've never had that happen. Every parent I talk to just starts nodding their head. And it's made in backhanded comments. It's made in comments like, I wouldn't allow my child to make those choices. And as a parent, as you watch your child evolve, you see that nature, that this is a natural part of who this person is. Mm-hmm. And I think as a parent, that when you can acknowledge that, that's like 95% of the battle within yourself. Mm-hmm. And then I also, you'll say something thinking you're being funny, or you'll say something. I had made a comment to my daughter, you can be whoever you want, just don't look the certain way. And I won't, it was a very derogatory term, and I thought it was funny at the time. And it was last summer, I was giving a presentation, and a woman showed up in the front row and wore that derogatory term on the front of a t-shirt. And my daughter had said, take this out of the book. And I said, I won't, because I made a mistake, and I want people to know I didn't always get it right. Mm-hmm. It was right, but people who read the book, it's going to offend them. They're not going to understand what you're trying to say. And I said, well, that's their problem. I've got to be honest, because I didn't always get it right. I I made my mistakes. So here this person is sitting at the front row with the derogatory term on her t-shirt. And I was like, oh crap. This is what my daughter warned me about, and then I thought, oh, she read the book. Yay.
Yeah.
And it was part of my presentation that day. And on that day, as I'm talking to the crowd, I realized that I put that stipulation thinking I was being funny because I was uncomfortable. And it wasn't my daughter's job to make me comfortable in this world. It's my job through education, understanding. I may not always understand. I may not always, but compassion and just basic respect for another human being.
Yeah, I think too that I've had a lot of people in my life, whether it was when I was queer or now that I have been out as trans, who will say, but you're not like them. And I'm like, and it's typically pointed at a specific, like, people with like colored hair or like different interests than I. And I'm like, but I am them. I am them. Like, they're trans, I'm trans. Like, we are trans. Like, they're queer, I'm queer. We are queer. And they think like that's, them being nice to me. Like, you're not one of them. At the end of the day, like, yeah, I might not look like them, but I am them. And like, that's not, you saying that to me does not make me feel better about myself. And the idea of, parents getting like backhanded comments and things like that. My mom more recently has gotten into some, I don't want to even say political debates, but just like, she's a lot more outspoken now. And somebody wrote to my mom, somebody who calls my mom a friend, and said, you're so brainwashed. Your beautiful daughter you call him your son now. You call her your son now. And, I'm not a parent, right? I will never know unless my wife has children or has kids, will never know what it truly is like to be a parent. But I do know my dad was a high school football coach in a small town. And I think coming from a small town, I saw, when my parents separated and then divorced, let's call them the mean moms, how they so easily like turned against my mom or like would, not invite my mom to things anymore. And I have I have 3 siblings, but a brother who's 2 years younger than me, who's a gay man. We both came out after high school. And the reality is even though my parents didn't disown me, they haven't been perfect. I was saying when I came out as queer, it was a lot easier for them. I remember I cried myself to sleep for 6 years and went to college and really struggled. And then like when I finally, I didn't even I made them guess what was wrong with me. And one of my younger sisters was like, you like girls? And I was like, yeah. And I was like crying. And my mom's like, that's why you're crying? She was like, we have stuff to do. We'll talk about this later. And we never talked about it again. Like, it wasn't a big deal. And then when my brother came out, there was my parents were okay with it, supportive to my brother, but there were definitely some conversations of how that was different than my wife and I. And I'm like, it's not different. Like, if you accept Kelsey and I, like, Logan is no different. And then I feel like when I came out as trans, that was completely different. Like, it's like my mom, even when I like went to, came out as queer, I think the biggest thing is like that I wouldn't get married. And that's something that she looked forward to. Now coming out as trans, like, it was, my dad said, you'll always be my, beautiful little girl. And the reality is like, yeah, that is who I was. You saw me as when I was younger, but the reality is I've always been Cam. Like, I was just, masked and dressed as a girl and did what I was supposed to do by society's terms, but Cam has always been at my core. Like, I've always been me. And it's took time. My dad at one point did not call me Cam. Everybody else in the room would call me Cam, but my dad wouldn't. And then, the next time I see him, and now at that point he had Cam down and he started calling me Cam. And then he's, within the last year with pronouns, he'll be like, he, and like, so it's, my parents aren't perfect by any means, but they are willing to try. And I think that's like the biggest, being a parent, the one thing your child wants you to do is just try. Just try to, they're still your child.
That is it right there. They are your child. They are the same child. And that person has always been there. And like you said, you performed, because I would tell my daughter, oh, one day you'll meet a really nice guy. And it just never dawned on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I jokingly said, well, I was going for an assertive female. I overshot it, accidentally raised a lesbian, which all of my queer friends think that's hilarious. But my straight friends, it's a nervous laughter because it's like, okay, where do you draw the line? And but yeah, you just raise your children. And like your mom, you get disowned, you get uninvited, you get excluded. And it is what it is. I had my daughter apologizing for me losing a friendship when she came out, and I stood by her. And I told her, I said, if that's all it took to lose that friendship, it wasn't much of a friendship to begin with.
Yeah.
And don't you dare apologize for what someone else has done.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you dare. So, yeah.
The thing that my mom, not back in 2018, but in 2023, she would just say, like, this is so hard for me. And she like kept saying that. And the one thing like I kept saying is like, this is also hard for me. Like, you think that this is not easy for me it's taken me years to get to this point. And I know that some aspects of my life for the rest of my life are going to be a little bit more difficult, but am I willing to live the rest of my life miserable every single day and putting on the show for people? Or am I willing to know that some aspects of my life might be more difficult, but overall I'm going to be a lot happier? Yeah. And I had to choose that happiness over any amount of discomfort, fear, difficulty, because I would have never made it through if I didn't.
Yeah. Well, and two, I share, and I don't know how to put it. I just use it, my coming out story. As my daughter came out, I came out in my own way as an ally, and it was in baby steps. So like, she came out 15 years ago. And if you had told me I would have written a book, done a podcast, and started a nonprofit, I would have said, no way, because there were a handful of people that knew. She married a woman named Bailey. So somebody would say, I said, oh, my daughter's getting married. Who's she married to? Bailey. I let them assume it was a male. I never corrected anybody at that point in time. So right before I semi-retired, this young lady looked at me and she goes, how many daughter-in-laws do you have? I said, I have 2. She goes, oh, you have 2 sons? I said, nope, 1 of each. And she just was like, her mouth kind of dropped open. And I looked at her and smiled. I go, we're one of those families. Which I thought was hilarious, And she's just, I don't think it was the shock. I think the shock was that I was just so like, with that right back, like, nope, 1 of each, 2 daughter-in-laws and 1 of each, a boy and a girl. So there we are. And I think it was just that I was so willingly to have been so open.
Yeah.
With her was what shocked her. I don't think it was that I had 2 daughter-in-laws and, 1 child, a daughter and a son, just that I was just that open. But that was my 15-year journey to be here.
Yeah.
And I'm just as proud of my daughter and daughter-in-laws as I am, my son and what everything that he's doing with his wife and his family. And it's just a great, amazing journey. And I cannot imagine if I had disowned my daughter, what I would have missed out on. And that's what I want parents to understand. You know, I had a parent that said, oh, when my daughter came out, I mourned the loss. I said, of what? Well, I mourn the loss. And I go, but you're not losing anything. You've allowed this child to be their true, authentic self, which is a great gift. I mean, when you're able to give that as a parent to your kid, and to accept them truly as they are. And you continue to be a part of their life. And I cannot, you know, my daughter graduated high school. She came out after high school, graduated college. I got to see that, got her first real job. She met Bailey. I knew Bailey was the one for her. And I was excited as I watched that relationship grow, you know, and cement. And then they got married, and Rachel's now working on her master's in art therapy. I mean, and I've got to be a part of all that. And I'm very thankful that they allow me in their life and that they share their life with me on the level that they do. It's just the same, my son and his wife, and I'm a brand new grandma for the last 6 months. So we got that. I mean, it's just really a fantastic life. And if I had disowned my daughter, it would have altered my relationship with my son, because he is fully accepting. He was out with his son outside, and he did a meeting. I was so proud of him. And he did a meeting with me, you know, like Google Meet or something. So we're talking, and there's a pride flag behind him. I said, where are you at? He goes, I'm at home. I go, well, whose pride flag is that? He goes, it's mine. It's June. And I was like, oh, I am so proud of you. And I wasn't expecting him to fly a pride flag on the side of his house, you know, but that's the family that I raised, and I'm super proud. But if I had disowned her, it would have altered my relationship with him as well. I mean, it would have just had this ramification of a wedge between all three of us. And I'm very blessed. And I've had my own journey and my own battles and my own fears and my own misconceptions, and a lot of learning. And I'm always willing to learn something. And I think that's one thing that if parents can take that approach, like, I'm going to learn something new every day, or I'm going to help somebody somehow on this journey that I'm on. Because I truly believe we're spiritual beings trying to have a human experience, not humans trying to have a spiritual. I think it's the opposite of that. But yeah, so, but I am really glad that you're here. I'm glad you're doing the work you're doing. So how would someone get a hold of you if they want to participate?
Yeah, they can, I mean, there's lots of ways. They could follow along. You can follow all the stories we'll be doing. In the meantime, before we get to the documentary and the book, we'll be doing interview profiles and short clips and stories on my Instagram, which is just Connect with Cam. My email address is connectwithcam13@gmail.com. And I mean, you could also look me up on the Commonwealth University website and find my, you know, my work email. Yeah, send me a DM on Instagram, send me an email. I will say I'm better at getting back to email than I am my DMs on Instagram, or I mean, my TikTok is also Connect with Cam. But any of those ways, I will eventually get back to you. I'm just very quick. My email, I'm probably back to people within like 15 minutes because I'm on it nonstop. My wife always yells at me for being on it too much. But yeah, there's lots of ways. I think the big thing is people hear trans, the 50 states of trans voices. And yes, I've had a lot of allies say, like, I want to share my like story. I love hearing ally stories, but I really do want the focus of these interviews to be with trans folks. But that does not mean that allies and other individuals can't be a part of the project. You can share information about the project. I basically have marketing materials for every state that I'm going to. I have a 50 States of Trans Voices sticker and postcard campaign that I can send postcards and stickers to individuals. If people know somebody who's trans and wants to introduce them to me to be a part of the project. I've had a lot of people say, like, I don't have much, but I want to support this. I had my first person, it was a year and a half ago, sent me $25 from New Jersey. The reality is this work is important, but it is expensive. to get to every state and be able with production costs and meals and lodging and travel. It's expensive. So I'm trying to offset costs by doing speaking engagements while I'm in certain states. It makes it easier when school's in session to do them on college campuses. But I've done stuff at, conferences, and I've worked with HR departments to do some trainings. But yeah, there's a variety of ways for people to get involved. And it's in my name. I love to connect with people, connect with Cam. So if anybody is interested, shoot me an email or a DM, and I'd be happy to see a way for us to partner.
Okay. And I will put, I'll look everything up on Instagram and TikTok. And that's how I found you. Was my daughter said, "Hey mom, you need to reach out to him." And I was like, "Oh, absolutely." And you did get back. It took me the next day getting back with you because I'm still learning TikTok. But I'll put your email up on the screen as I go into editing this information. What advice would you give to a young person who's not sure of who they are? They've identified, and think about yourself back before you knew anything. You knew, okay, I'm queer, or I'm part of the LGBTQ plus. And just like you've explained your story and where you've transitioned, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well, in accepting who you truly are. What advice would you have to someone who is just starting to kind of figure some things out?
Yeah, my biggest piece of advice, and I just was having a conversation with a 16-year-old at a conference, who has figured himself out, but he got there and he asked, "Is there any staff member who would be willing to talk to me? I'm new in my transition." And I'm the only person who's visibly trans. So, but I went up to him on the last day and I said, we do like warm and fuzzies. And I said, "I want to give you a warm and fuzzy." And he said, "Me?" And I said, "Yeah, I know that you wanted to connect with me to talk about transitioning, but the reality is you are so much further ahead than I was when I was your age." And my advice to him was just let yourself be. Let yourself do the things you love. Spend your time around people who bring joy to your life. And everything else is going to work itself out. There's a lot of my being that I repressed that I didn't let myself, like, if you would have asked me 3 years ago if I'd be wearing an earring, I wouldn't have worn the earring. I thought it had to be super masculine. But I realized that there are many ways to be a man. And not all men look the same. They don't act the same. I wish when I was younger, I think that once I hit high school, I stopped being the person that I was. When I started figuring out what it actually meant to be gay, and I got scared of that. But on the flip side of letting yourself be, and you're still going to be afraid, is there's a whole community, and it sounds cliche, but there's a community of people ready to embrace you. And my hope is that you still have your family at the end of it, like I do, but there's chosen family too. And there's a lot of people in my life who I'm closer to them, and they're not my biological family. They are my chosen family. And I think you're going to have this idea that everybody you surround yourself has to be a queer person. That's not true. The people that I spend the most time with are cis het individuals. One of my greatest allies, and she's a mentor, but like a second mom to me, is somebody who's in her mid-50s. She is Catholic, but she truly knows what it means to, love someone and love thy neighbor. But I think also my advice is people will surprise you. And sometimes you think they're going to surprise you negatively. More times than not in my life, I've been surprised for the better. I go into a situation like scared. When I came out in college athletics, terrified. I worked it up to be this big thing in my brain. And I think a lot of that was just my dad being a high school football coach, knowing how my dad was going to handle me being trans, and put that on to everybody else that was in athletics. And the reality is when I worked at RPI, that was the best place. I couldn't have asked for a better place to come out as trans. My students, they did not care. They were just like, at the end of the day, you're still going to help us make sure we're successful in the classroom, going to make sure we can play the sports we want to play. I still showed up as the same person. The only difference was my name was now one syllable, which was a lot easier for them to remember. And I think that if you like allow yourself to be surprised.
Yeah. And I think too, people that I thought that would have been supportive, I found out were not. And people that I really expected to get pushed back really surprised me numerous times. That's happened. What advice would you give to a parent whose kid has come to them and says, I'm LGBTQ plus, and let's say they're 12 to 14 years old, they may be younger, they may be a little bit older, and then say, and I may be trans, and then maybe walks out the door wearing high heels or handbags or false eyelashes. And what would you tell that parent?
Before I answer that, I wanted to add something to
Absolutely.
what I would tell. I mean, this is really anybody, but something that helped me when I was starting to tell people, when I came out as queer, that was a whole different thing. Like I told my family, and then once they supported it, I didn't care what other people thought. But coming out as trans was a little bit different, I think, because of all of the societal like issues of what it means to be trans. Something that helped me was I had this like system where I had people who were very low risk, and also I didn't care what they thought about it, right? So they're low risk, like I don't spend a lot of time with them, but also low risk because if they don't accept me, oh well, move on. Then I had people like the person who is my mentor, who was low risk that I thought she was going to accept me, but high risk, like, oh shit, if she doesn't accept me, like it would really hurt me. And then, but you know, you get the quadrants, whatever, like low, low, high, high, low, high, high, low. I obviously my wife was number one, and that's like very like I knew that she would probably accept me, but high risk. But I had to tell her first, like that's my wife, that's my person. But after her, I started telling people who didn't really have much value to my life just to test it out, just to get comfortable in owning my truth. And then once I had told a couple people that I'm like, and that might be somebody random, like, you know, you meet a queer person online and you're like, you know what, I think I'm trans. Or that might be just an acquaintance that you're like, you know what, this friendship doesn't really mean that much to me. And then then you work yourself up and you become more confident. So then once you get to those people who are like, that you're really nervous to tell, it's like you're so confident in who you are that no matter how they react, you're going to be okay. You will figure it out. Now, going to your question about a parent, I think the biggest thing that my biggest piece of advice is that one, I think as somebody who like, I know that I only like women, but I truly believe in some aspect, like sexuality is very fluid. I think that gender is very fluid. I just look at my wife who she's cisgender, but some days she's very androgynous and some days she's more feminine. I look at my brother who he's a gay man, but he's also cis, but he's painted his nails. He's worn, wear short shorts. Like, I think one, like we only have one life. We're only here one time. There's nothing wrong with exploring. There's also nothing wrong with, I know a lot of parents worry that somebody's going to come out and they're going to start exploring and then they're going to realize they're not trans. That's okay too. Let them, when they're younger, explore. It doesn't hurt anybody by your child trying, out new pronouns or a new name or an outfit, right? I would rather somebody in my life change their pronouns and I've seen this on different pride signs. I'd rather allow the people around me to explore and figure out who they are than them not be here and not be able to provide that space for them. And if they change it, 10 times, whatever. But the reality is I think a lot of people think that more people detransition than they really do. And the reality is even people who do detransition, I fully believe it's not because they're not trans. It's because of those societal pressures. It's because of religion. It's because of, a lot of Christians commenting on things and saying like, God made you the way you are. Like you were born a woman or you're born a man. It's not because they aren't actually trans. People are detransitioning because I've seen a lot of people, especially with the current political climate, say, you know what, it's going to be easier for me to detransition and live my life again as a woman. That has nothing to do with who they truly are on the inside. That's all those societal pressures. And I think as a parent, you have the role is you can either be your child's first supporter or you can be your child's first bully when it comes to their identity or their sexuality. And I think I've talked to a lot of people who don't have their family and who have been disowned, and their parents have definitely chosen to be their first bully. And later on in life, there's going to be a time where that parent might finally come to terms with that, and it might be too late. Whether your child's, no longer there because they took their life, or they don't want to have anything to do with you because when they needed you most, you were not there. And you then are like, oh, but I've come to terms and I'm doing XYZ. Well, sometimes it's a little too late. And my hope for all parents is, you talked about it earlier, is like, think about how much you would miss if you weren't a part of your child's life. And the reality is like, I have had to see that firsthand with my wife, how much of my in-laws, how much of our life that we lived in Oklahoma. And we moved, that's where my wife's originally from. We moved back to Pennsylvania because they weren't willing to accept us as we were. And they've come, a lot further than they were. But I know how much my family means to me, and I know how much my wife's family meant to her. And to go through life knowing that there's a piece of my life that will always be a little broken, I don't wish that on anybody. And I remember writing my, asking for the blessing to marry my wife, even though I knew I wouldn't get it. I remember saying like, I am asking for this because I don't want you to miss out on all of our milestones.
Yeah.
And, whether that's the miles you talked about, you've gotten to see your daughter, get her first career job, get married, start doing masters. Like, those are things that, too many family members miss out on because they're not willing to put aside their feelings or do the work on themselves.
Yeah.
And something that, resonated with me earlier is like mourning the loss. Well, that person is still there in the flesh.
And then you're not mourning anything. I always looked at it that my daughter was communicating very openly and honestly with me. And that made me feel good that we had fostered that level of a relationship, that she was able to say, and she came out like, I'm bi. And I was like, okay, well, within a month or two, I was like, I think you're really kind of gay. Like, oh, no. If I met a guy, this would be it. And she went along, and then she brought a girl home, and there was such an ease to her that had never been there before. And I was like, oh, honey, you're just so gay. And so we went through that for a couple of years. And then one day she called me up and she said, you're right. I am. And her voice cracked. I mean, and I was like, great. This is how you were designed. This is exactly who you're supposed to be. And I don't want you to change. I love you just the way you are. And that was huge. And I think I also talked to, the older people who've been disowned, and they went through 15, 20 years. The parents come back in, they reestablish a relationship. 9 times out of 10, they're disowned because of religious reasons. And so that basic relationship of complete 100% trust has been shattered.
Yep.
and can never be reestablished. I mean, it just can't. Yeah, you can build on a new relationship. The parents aren't the same people that disown the kid, and the kid's not the same person. But that basic that's comes because you're the parent of trust is absolutely gone and can never be reestablished. And I really want parents to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you you know, and it's okay to look at your kid and go, you know, this is making me uncomfortable. I hear what you're saying, but I've got to work on some things myself, and I'm afraid for you. I
Mm-hmm.
love you, but I'm really afraid for you. And I think that most people would say, I understand that, you know, and it's not. And then you do work on yourself. You do find some books. You do go to seminars. You go on YouTube. You find, you know, the podcast, and you just you educate yourself
Mm-hmm.
so
And I
that you can be that good ally.
and I think like having that open dialogue is so important. Like the one thing, and not, not, I'm not saying everybody who's in my position needs to be ready and open to answer any question, but when I first came out as queer, I remember my dad told my grandmother, and she just texted me and was like, I don't understand how you get that way. And I was like, well, Mimi, I don't think I got this way. I think I believe I was born this way. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. But until like, if you don't like support me, then I don't want to have that conversation. And the same thing with like, when I came in as trans is like, I'm willing to have any conversation to help somebody better understand who I am as a human. But you have to be open and willing to have that conversation. Like there's been multiple people in my life who I've said to my therapist, like, I would love to have a conversation with them because I think that I know that they have to have questions and I can see their brain going, but they have not initiated that. They haven't said, hey, Cam, I have these questions, or hey, Cam, can we have a conversation? And I don't want to assume that they want to have a conversation. I want that. I've told them, I've shared this, information about me with them. It's now in their court, and I want them to say what they need from me. And something that you talked about earlier is like, if you wouldn't have accepted your daughter, how it would have changed the dynamic of your relationship with your son. And I think that's true of most families, like whether they realize it or not. I even think of like my extended family in the certain spaces that I'm in. It's like kind of uncomfortable sometimes. It's like I don't have to show up to any space, but I want to be in this space for, maybe it's Father's Day or Christmas or whatever, but I have to make that decision. Am I going to go to that space because of my immediate family and be okay being uncomfortable because of my extended family not accepting me? Or am I going to just have to sit this holiday out because it's too much discomfort for me? And there have been times where, most times than not, I just choose to be uncomfortable in those spaces. But I don't think those people realize that. I think they do afterwards, but realize in the moment going in those situations, like, we've put this wedge between our families, like whether it's like a dad and or like a brother and a sister, or two sisters. That whole dynamic shifts. And yeah, I've seen it that way. And I also know that my family, I know, especially if my family wouldn't have accepted my brother, my dynamic would have changed, because how am I would never be okay with you accepting me and my wife, but not my brother. And me and my siblings are super, super close. So when I came out as trans, I said, my sisters were like, oh, let's pick a new name. I came out to my brother a little later, but I know at the end of the day, like, I have my siblings back. And I know that if my family, like, if I even saw it, like, when my mom would misgender me, my sister was correcting her, like, right away, like saying, like, and I think having my siblings also helped my parents kind of grow and get to where I want them to be a little faster, because it's like, it's really easy when the one person who's different isn't around. Like, I'm trans, I'm somewhere else. I'm not going to be there to correct them when they use the wrong pronouns. But to have an ally and a sibling who's like, you mean he, I think really helped my parents. And I just wish that more parents would see that it's really not the end of the world. Like their children can still have, you know, I know when people come out as queer, parents like, oh, they're never going to get married. I envision, like moms, oh, I envision this wedding for them. They can still get married and they can still be wearing that dress that you envision them wearing. Like that doesn't mean, and I mean, sometimes it might mean that they don't wear a dress, but yeah, it's all like relative to each person. But I just wish that more parents would realize like I promise the world's not going to end.
It's not the end of the world. It is not, it, I can't imagine my daughter not being where she's at and not having Bailey in her life, her wife. I can't imagine what her life would be like because it's just so rich. And she's made lists and gone out for jobs, and she's got a degree in fine arts with and also color theory, which sounds kind of crazy, but it kind of goes across every aspect of life. And then she decided she was a makeup artist for Dior and also Charlotte Tilbury. And then she decided that she wanted to go to vet med. So she became I guess like a vet tech.
Mm-hmm.
And then she wanted to work with big cats while she did that, while she lived in Colorado. And now she's going for her master. She's back into makeup and she's going for her master's in art therapy. And she's super excited about that. And she is going to want to be within the LGBTQ plus community, and really focus a lot of her work through that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, hats off to her. She illustrated my book. So
Right.
the story is about us, and I sent it to her and my son for their approval because it's our story. You know, it's from my perspective, but it's our story. And I said, if it's a no, it's a no, but I'd like to self-publish. So she came back with, yes, it's a yes, but I'm an illustrator. Now she's already accomplished illustrator. She did not need my book at all. She's been, yeah. So I was like, okay. So she illustrated it. She goes, the kids need it. I said, I didn't write for the kids. I wrote for the parents. And she said, I know, but the kids are going to get the book and then they're going to give it to the parents. I was like, whatever. And she was 100% right. You know, the first time I went out and did a talk, it was the high school kids. And I was like, this is weird. And so the high school kids were like, oh my gosh, it's got pictures. And I was like, okay, she was 100% right. I'm the marketer, you know. So, but I mean, we've just gone through this journey together, and it's not always been easy. It's not always been, you know, a lot of fun, but oh my gosh, what a ride. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I really wouldn't.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, all right. So I'm going to put some stuff up here. Is there anything else you want to share that we haven't covered today?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, if you think of something, you let me know. Okay. And
Okay, I will.
podcast. And if you'll keep us updated, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I'm going to hit stop record and we're going to go from there. Just stay on. Don't hang up.